Okay, everyone, if you'd please take your seats, we're going to begin our CLE program. And I think Diana Singleton's going to start us off. Yes? No? Change? Yeah, but you're going to start first, right? Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay, I think we don't have quite all of our presenters, but I think they should be arriving soon. So we do have one of our presenters, so I'll go ahead and start us off if that's okay, President Tollefson.
Please.
Okay, great. Well, hello everybody. I'm Diana Singleton. I'm the Chief Equity and Justice Officer at the Bar Association. And today we have a presentation that follows a number of other presentations that the Board of Governors has had around topics of diversity, equity, inclusion. You heard from Q-Law in January. You heard from Justice Gordon MacLeod and Elizabeth Hendren in March. And today we have the great honor of having local leaders in Spokane talk about the racial justice efforts that they've been doing. So we will be having Governor Francis Adewale, who'll be moderating this panel presentation. So he should be arriving soon because he had to go to another event. But we have a couple other presenters who are here, one virtually and one in person. So just to give you an overview of who you'll be hearing from today, first you'll hear from Janae Ball, who's here in person. Janae is the immediate past president of the Spokane County Bar Association and the chair of the SCBA Task Force on Systemic Racism in the Regional Justice System. And then also you'll hear from Carmen Pacheco-Jones, who's the founder and executive director of the Health and Justice Recovery Alliance. And Carmen is appearing on Zoom virtually. And then later you'll hear from Jermaine Williams, who's the director of the Freedom Project East. And for those of you who are at the Washington State Bar Foundation reception, Jermaine shared a little bit about his work then. And then, of course, you'll hear from Francis, who will be moderating the panel presentation. One other thing to note is that today's panel presentation is approved for 1.5 CLE credits of ethics. So if you're here in person and you'd like to get CLE credits, you can sign in the sign-in sheet in the front. And then if you're here virtually or hybrid, I will post a link to that attendance attestation in the chat, and you could do it online. And then I'll also post a link to an evaluation that we'd appreciate you filling out after the presentation. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Janae Ball.
Thank you, Diana. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you so much for having me here today. Again, my name is Janae Ball. I'm the immediate past president of the Spokane County Bar Association, and I'm the chair of our Systemic Racism Task Force. I know that the phrase systemic racism is highly politically charged and has created a tremendous amount of controversy. And I believe in part that's because that phrase is greatly misunderstood. When we use the word systemic racism, what we're really talking about are systems, institutions, procedures that are in place that are perpetuating harm. What we're not talking about is focusing on individuals and whether they are racist. And while I imagine over the course of our careers, many of us have heard stories of unjust outcomes in our justice system, what's pretty amazing that's happening right now with technology is we have the data that has been available for a really long time that's reported out by our court system. And with the help of Microsoft and some other really amazing tech geniuses, we're able to collate that data and examine it. And what that data is showing is those stories of systemic racism are true. And it's everywhere. And in Spokane County, if you're a Black man and you are facing a first-degree theft charge, you are going to be sentenced on average at 67% of the range, where your white counterpart with a similar criminal history will receive less than 20% of the range. And that is just one data point. There are thousands out there that tell the story over and over of how systemic racism is absolutely embedded in our justice system. And just because we examine these inequities does not mean that we want to burn down our country or that we hate it. And I'll share this with you. I'm the wife of a veteran. My husband served 29 years. I am very proud of our country. I am a proud American. We are raising our boys to have an absolute love of country. They're 11 and 13. And I share this because two things can be true at once. You can be a proud patriot, and you can also recognize that we have systems and institutions in place that are constantly perpetuating harm on our racial and ethnic minorities. And I would say that as attorneys, we're duty bound to examine these inequities. When we took our oath of office, we agreed to be fully subject to the laws of this country, to the US Constitution, to our state constitution. We agreed to support those laws, and we agreed that we would never reject the cause of the defenseless and the oppressed. We gave that oath as attorneys. Racism is an absolute scourge in this country, and it is a human rights issue. I despair when I hear constantly in the media and in the zeitgeist that it is made into a political issue. It is not politics, people. It is human rights. It is a legal right. So that's my little soapbox before I get into my presentation. So thank you for allowing me that. Could we go to the next slide, please? So after the murder of George Floyd, and in response to our Washington State Supreme Court letter, which was an absolute call to action, we, the Spokane County Bar Association, heard that call and made one of our own for our own membership here. And you cannot see it because it's in pretty tiny print up there. But this is a statement that I wrote with the help of Francis and some others, where we, the Spokane County Bar Association, made a pledge to stamp out systemic racism in our regional justice system, and to pledge that every year we would devote a CLE to examining racism, a day-long CLE, where we would invite members of the judiciary and other key community leaders to examine what we could do at a local level. Next slide, please. So September 26th of 2020 was our first of these CLEs. It took place on a Saturday. It was an all-day event, and because it was in the fall of 2020, it was fully virtual. We had 190 people in attendance. We kicked off the event with a keynote from Justice Deborah Stevens, who was the Chief Justice at the time, and Justice Montoya Lewis, who talked about their, I believe it was a June 2020 letter, their call to action letter to all members of our legal profession. The particular focus of this CLE was to give voices to the impacted community members. So after we heard from the justices of our state Supreme Court, we had, I believe it was 4 people speak about their individual experiences and how race their race impacted how they were able to walk through our justice system. Then we had a presentation done by Just Lead of Washington that provided somewhat of a framework for the terminology we needed to use and what we're talking about when we're discussing systemic racism, which again is institutions and systems in place, not attacking individuals. And then after that, we broke into 4 breakout sessions. Because a bulk of the Spokane County Bar Association is civil practitioners, we felt it was really important to allow 2 of those 4 breakouts to have a civil focus. So we focused on BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, business leaders and owners. And then a second track was family law. And then we had 2 criminal tracks. One was the first appearance pretrial release. And then the second was the school to prison pipeline. And after those breakout sessions, we all came together as a group, and people agreed to, a bulk of the attendees actually agreed to sign up for subcommittees, each with regard to one of those 4 breakouts, to try and tackle these really large issues. Next slide, please. So from there, what we did is we started a task force, and we paid particular focus on making sure that we had a member of each level of our local judiciary on the task force, as well as the city and county prosecuting attorney offices and public defender offices, as well as key community leaders. We wanted to make sure we had representation of our criminal bar, our civil bar, our family law bar, making sure we had a voice from our Indigenous population as well, and buy-in from Gonzaga University School of Law. And this task force was formed in December of 2020. And we had our first meeting in January of 2021. We met on a monthly basis, during which time the chairs of each of those committees that were formed out of the 4 breakout sessions I mentioned earlier would report back up to the task force on the strides that they had been making. Next slide, please. Hi, Francis. Fast forward to September of 2021, we held our second CLE. And while our first one was a focus on impacted people and giving them voice and allowing them to speak to power, our second CLE was focusing on solutions. What sort of solutions can we devise to impact, have a change, rather, the systemic racism in our regional justice system? And this was at a point where a group called the American Equity and Justice League American Equity and Justice Group, that had just presented at the 2021 Access to Justice Conference, had this amazing, powerful presentation where they came forward with all the data, again, with the help of the tech geniuses at Microsoft, where they dumped in all of this criminal justice data that had our local courts and at the state level have been keeping track of for years, but no real way to collate that or understand it. They were able to dump it into this database, and then you could tease information out. So for example, you could look at sentencing data on a particular judge and break it down by race or age or gender. You could look at individual prosecuting attorneys, deputy prosecuting attorneys, see if they're in their charging decisions are having a disproportionate impact on certain racial or ethnic minorities. So we had a presentation from that group. We also had a presentation from Maggie Yates, who at that time was the Spokane Regional Law and Justice Coordinator. She was funded through the MacArthur Grant, and her role was to, on a local level, bring information to Spokane County leadership on jail statistics and other related data. Then what we did is, because it was such a data dump on these attendees, we had these breakout sessions where the people could come together and talk about what it was that they learned. We had some other sessions relating to the 4 subcommittees that we formed as a task force. So the school to prison pipeline, BIPOC business owners, and first appearance pretrial release, that had done a tremendous amount of work on a local level, actually. Unfortunately, our family law group was not able to really get off the ground, but Francis won't let that group disband. So they're still limping along on our agenda. And then we all came together and we had various, we had Justice Stevens, we had a retired Superior Court judge here in town, Judge O'Connor. We had a GU law professor, Inga Laurent. We had the school board president at that time, Jarrell Haynes, and Spokane City Attorney Mike Ormsby, people who are all occupying great positions of power, talk about how they were going to take ownership within their own realm. And it was, again, another call to action, if you will. Next slide, please. After the 2021 CLE survey, CLE, we had a survey done. And what I would like to point your attention to is the second graph that states, what was your understanding of systemic racism before the CLE? And we're getting some weird feedback here. So before the CLE, we had a pretty high level of knowledge of people who were attending. And what that says to me is we are unfortunately continuing to preach to the choir. What the Systemic Racism Task Force of the SCBA is hoping to do is not to continue to preach to the choir, to have new people at the table, people who are not in the criminal justice system, like Francis is a public defender, or people who are working in the nonprofit realm, but people like me, corporate attorneys, other civil practitioners, come to the table and have these discussions because this is an issue about which we should all care. So we're going to continue with our outreach efforts so we're not having the same people at the table all the time. Next slide, please. So in furtherance of that goal, the Systemic Racism Task Force has now taken on community outreach. And we've done that in the form of having several meetings with the U.S. Attorney's Office. The Department of Justice has a new pilot program called United Against Hate. And our U.S. Attorney here for the Eastern District of Washington was, I think we're only one of 2 here. She really fought quite hard for her office to become one of the pilot programs, one of 2 in the country, to kick off the United Against Hate. And so part of what the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing is reaching out to local leadership and trying to form collaborations, whether it be with the Bar Association. They have a particular interest in the school to prison pipeline. The reason being is because anytime federal funding is involved, it gives the DOJ a hook into making sure that the money is being spent in a non-discriminatory manner. So we've been working with the U.S. Attorney's Office pretty closely. We also had 2 presentations that we did with our local Rotary Club, which unfortunately created a great deal of controversy. When we did our proposal to Rotary for our first presentation, the title I floated was Solutions to Systemic Racism in Our Regional Justice System. And unfortunately, we got a lot of pushback on that because of the phrase systemic racism and how polarizing that is and how misunderstood it is. At that point in time, we had some people who were part of our task force and our outreach committee, in particular people of color, who are constantly having to take on the laboring oar of this work and are absolutely exhausted at having to do so. Say, I can't do this, I'm sorry, trying to get people to come to the table to talk about racism when we can't even agree on the word systemic racism is just too much, which is understandable. So we had some of those people bow out. We continue to push forward. We were able to arrive at a more palatable title for our presentation, which was Solutions to Entrenched Racial Inequalities in Our Regional Justice System. And at that first presentation, Maggie Yates, who again at the time was with the Spokane Regional Law and Justice Council, she was the administrator, simply presented data. And we were thinking data would not be controversial, but it turned out that yes, data supporting racism continues to be controversial. Next slide, please. So our presentation had tremendous pushback, and our local Spokane County Sheriff, Ozzie Knezovich, and our Spokane County Prosecuting Attorney, Larry Haskell, asked to do a rebuttal to our presentation that again was just about data and cold hard facts. And I would also offer, did not talk that much about racism. A lot of it was simply about the population of our jail and how the people in our jail are almost exclusively poor Indigenous people. And a lot of the people that are being held in jail prior to their first appearance are there for low-level crimes with $1,000 or less in bail and can't make bail. And that's why they're being held there. It's just the cold hard data, folks. There's no racial spin to that. It's just what's inputted in our criminal justice system when we're tracking people as to why they're being incarcerated. And we're just simply presenting on that. But apparently that was too much for some people. So a rebuttal was done. It was very personal in nature. I would say it was a personal attack on Miss Yates. She got a lot of blowback from her presentation at the county level. And again, that was the role that she was hired to do, present data. She ended up resigning from her position as a result. It was just too much of a cross for her to bear anymore. We ended up doing a second presentation to Rotary thereafter on February 10th, where we focused on the school to prison pipeline that was not as controversial, apparently, for the attendees and our local leadership. Eventually, the media got hold of Maggie's resignation and what happened at the Rotary presentation, and they did a large expose on it in the Inlander. That was picked up by the spokesman, and it went national. It's not a very flattering portrayal of our local criminal justice leadership, to say the least. And it's been quite divisive in our community. And again, all we were trying to do was present data. That's it. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of Maggie. Maggie now is running for county commissioner. But there are links to the news articles presented, I believe, in the next slide. Or not.
The links are in the materials.
The links are in the materials. Okay, thank you. So, thank you.
Ms. Janae Ball is very dear to us in this community. Sometimes you find an ally that is willing to put their neck on the line for you. It's always very rare. She has taken leadership on this issue at the price to her own career, at a very heavy cost to her. And I just cannot thank you enough for what you have done to take leadership on this issue. Sometimes moment makes you. Sometimes history forces things on you that you never bargained for. She happens to be the Spokane County Bar Association president when George Floyd died. And people were asking her a lot of questions. What are you doing? What can your bar association do? And she called a couple of us together and said, you know, and the board decided, let's look into it. Let's examine it. Is this system fair to everyone? Let's look at it. That's how it started. It takes somebody willing to challenge the orthodoxy. Because sometimes we get used to, oh, it cannot be true. Well, what about the data? Former FBI director, James Comey, wrote in his book that he said he felt challenged when people say mass incarceration. He said because each and every one that were incarcerated were individually charged to court, individually sentenced. How did mass get into it? And he said, he told President Obama, I will not go along with this. I don't agree that there is mass incarceration. He said, so Obama said, let's bring in the data. And he said, they started looking at the data. James Comey said, data upon data upon data, and when you look at the same circumstances, you could see the difference. So we cannot run away from data that shows that Blacks, Hispanics, especially in Eastern Washington, Native American are predominantly charged and, incarcerated. Pre-trial, let's not even look at sentencing or post-sentence data. They stay longer in jail because they cannot afford bond. You could say that's their problem. Well, is it justice to have people forced to plead guilty so that they can get out of jail? So let's continue to work together to look at this. It's not about name calling. It's not about using anything as a sword or as a shield. It is about us asking ourselves tough questions. Are we doing the best? Are we the best champion for justice that we should be? If we are not, let's do more. And I'm so grateful to the Board of Governors for allowing us to do this presentation. I hope my dear friend, Janae Ball, and her wonderful family, military family, for all that they do for the community. I'm grateful to you for your leadership and for the leadership of Spokane County Bar Association. I've said so much. I'm going to now hand the mic to someone that is directly impacted by the justice system. Our story is very unique. When we had Spokane host the Access to Justice Conference 4 months ago, it's a long time ago now, she told a story about how difficult it is to give birth in a prison cell. If you think that is fun, just look at her. At that time, some of the reform that we are doing now were not on the table. You cannot go anywhere. She had a story. Today, she's the chair of Washington State Statewide Reentry Council. She has been a leader in our community in challenging this status quo. The Law and Justice Council of our county was put in place by Mayor David Condon and others to look at some of these issues. And they started a race equity subcommittee of that Law and Justice Council. But that has since gone away. And I'm grateful to President Tollefson for starting the conversation on some of these issues with our county commissioners, our mayors, and our elected officials. But now I'm going to defer to my friend, Carmen Pacheco-Jones, who will tell you our experience working on race equity in Eastern Washington. Carmen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Francis. And I am just humbled by your introduction and also being in the presence of such esteemed members of the Bar Association and practitioners across our state. Thank you so much for allowing me this time to present. And I apologize, I am not in person. I am currently diagnosed with COVID. And so in an effort to not spread, I am quarantining. And so I just like to tell you a little bit about my story. I think Francis shared some of it, but you know, if any of you have worked closely with me, you know that as an individual, as a Black identifying woman who has experienced, you know, multiple incarcerations, that I've used my story to be the catalyst for transforming our criminal legal system, not only in the area of race equity and disproportionality, but also in an effort to advocate for the disabled, for those experiencing deep poverty, substance use disorder, mental illness, because all of those are also part of my story. So a little bit of background, I had my first felony at 18, just a couple of weeks after my 18th birthday, and having moved out or being pushed out of the child welfare system, I aged out shortly before, pregnant and addicted to heroin. And then experiencing incarceration, very low bail. Nobody offered me treatment. Nobody said, could this be a potential option for you? But incarceration was. And what did I do after I was released? You know, I went right back to what I had known. And I continued that cycle for many years. And Francis is correct in stating that, you know, while incarcerated, I did give birth. While it wasn't in a jail cell, I was still shackled to a bed while having a C-section performed on me. You know, while we know that those practices are now being identified as, you know, traumatic and problematic, they are still happening, you know, across our state and across our nation. And we should be aware of that, because if we look at the well-being not only of you know, the parent, but of the child that is being born, the assumptions that are made when a pregnant woman is brought into the hospital in shackles. And I'm not just talking, you know, hands behind your back, I'm talking shackles. For a non-violent criminal, from someone who was incarcerated because of money crimes, that is unacceptable. And so I advocate for our community. And moving back to Diana's original introduction of me, I am the co-founder of the Health and Justice Recovery Alliance. But let me tell you how that was born. Through the MacArthur funding, and as a member of the Law and Justice Council, chairing their Racial Equity Committee, when this funding opportunity came about, we looked at what other sites across the nation were doing, and they were hiring a member of the system, an individual that would act as a community liaison, but they were still part of the system. And we knew that Spokane could do something better. We asked through multiple meetings, and Francis will attest to this, that, give us the opportunity to write the grant, to build a program that will address recidivism, that will address the disproportionate funneling in of individuals, Black, brown individuals into the criminal legal system. And let us work with individuals from a perspective of those of us who have been there, those of us who have navigated those systems, who've come out of it, and now can support our community, our impacted community that are not only in the criminal legal system, but that are at risk as well. And so we built a pilot project to address trauma. And trauma is one of the most significant indicators of recidivism, of relapse, of destabilization. And we put individuals through 12-week cohorts. We worked with the skill building, with stabilization, providing them safe housing, psychoeducational support, peer support, peer mentoring. And then we gave them job training and ushered them into a supportive work environment where if they knew that they were having issues at work, that they always had their peer mentor, their case manager to rely on. But we helped them develop their own voice and move past that trauma that had brought them into the criminal legal system. And we helped them achieve what their version of trauma mastery looked like to them. Since 2018, we have graduated over 50 individuals that are currently still in the workforce. And we continue to work with these individuals as they come into our program. Our peer navigator training program is asked for in many spaces within many organizations. Can we come and work with their individuals, their participants, their clients? And we do so. And we do so without charge, because this is our goal and mission, is to reduce the impact of incarceration, of recidivism, to stabilize families, and to get people into the workforce contributing, because we know that that's where we find our worth at. We've since then branched out into working with individuals that are in the criminal legal system that also intersect with the child welfare system. So children of incarcerated parents, we are contracted with DCYF, building a community prevention plan that addresses Spokane's very high rates of child abuse and maltreatment. And it's about stabilizing communities. And if you think that the criminal legal system is unique to its disparate impact on Black and Indigenous communities, the child welfare system is the same. Spokane was identified as one of 4 areas across the state to receive this funding from DCYF to do this work because of the high rates of Black and Indigenous children that are funneled into or referred into the child welfare system. This is happening across the board. And it really goes back to what Janae was saying. It's a structural issue built upon the construct of race. And historically, the construct of race is created to create a dominant power source. And I don't think I have to tell you who that dominant, or who benefits from that dominant power source. But we all need to work together, to acknowledge that that force exists, and what are the steps in dismantling it. I want to share an experience as a member of the Spokane Regional Law and Justice Council, along with, the sheriff, the chief of police, our mayor, our chief prosecutor, those individuals, and being a person who has experienced incarceration, and being a person that has been criminalized because of my skin color, because of, my experience, just trying to exist. and trying to advocate and hold accountable for equity. At one point, the Racial Equity Committee, through the MacArthur Foundation, was awarded funding to bring in trainers on race, equity, and implicit bias. And we were very intentional. And while that money never crossed our hands, we, the members of the Racial Equity Committee, we that were a justice system community-based collaborative, were able to make the decisions of who those trainers would be. We brought in Gayer, and we brought in Just Lead Washington. And during the initial phases and conversations of the training, I asked Gayer and our then Justice Administrator, this predates Maggie Yates a little bit, how many seats would the Racial Equity Committee have at this training table? And I was told that we would not be welcome at that training, at that series, those series of trainings. It was 3 trainings across a 3-day period. And I challenged, like, why would we not be welcome? I mean, this was our grant funding. This is our organizing efforts. And now you're telling us that we cannot attend this training. And the response was that system actors need to feel safe when they're processing this information. And they cannot do so with individuals from diverse backgrounds there. Now think about that for a moment. Think about the message that perpetuates. And I just want to see if that resonates within you. If Black and brown people are not allowed at the table because there's a perception that they create harm, that their very presence can be a triggering or have a triggering impact on white individuals at the table. You know, of course, that is not an acceptable response. And I, again, challenged, what she was perpetuating and the systemic issues and the bias, the stereotyping, all of that. And through multiple conversations, was able to get our committee members seats at the table to participate in those trainings. But that's what we had to do at every level. There was not one part where we did not have to fight back and fight and justified in our fighting back. Because if we didn't challenge that, what is the progress? What is ever going to happen out of this work that we are trying to achieve? We need to normalize spaces where Black and brown people are leading, where Black and brown people are heard and are not just seen as taking up space or tokenized. We need to listen to their voices, especially to those who have navigated the system. And we need to normalize that we are trying to achieve a similar goal, and without a similar investment of time and effort and energy and passion and compassion, we will never achieve it. And we will only continue to move back and regress. And we've seen that through the Black Lives Matter movement. Every time something comes up where we have some kind of progress, we see the retaliatory actions that happen afterwards. So I hope that I am, trying to relay what our experience here is in Spokane, as those of us who are, fighting for racial equity, the pushback that we experience. And we're doing this for free. Like, this is something that we are so invested in. We're not asking for dollars, but it does have a long-term impact on our emotional well-being. We're trying to build thriving communities and just experiences for all, regardless of the title or race or whatever designation has been applied to us. And we continue to experience pushback. I hope that I have summed that up. And again, I would say that it's not unique to Spokane. Sitting as co-chair of Washington Statewide Reentry Council, we experience similarly, the disparities that exist within, funding sources. We can't figure out how to get funding to agencies that are by and for. We can't, figure out how to serve, Black and Brown individuals. And so they're not at crisis. And so that when they show up for behavioral health, or they show up at the hospital, or they show up at a place where they are in need of help, that they're not arrested because somebody views their attitude, their behavior as something to be fearful of. We have a lot of work to do. We have a distance to go. And we need individuals that are willing to push that forward. Just like Francis said about Janae, that sometimes, even if, there is some positional potential impact or retaliation, we still move forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You could see why she's my leader. Thank you, Carmen. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Brother Jermaine Williams. You met him last night. For those of you that attended the reception, there is a lot he has to say. So I'll give the mic to him.
I'm timing myself to try not to make this too long. So again, welcome everybody, and more so than just being here for this event, I want to say thank you for allowing me to be here in this space for this event. So full transparency before I get into this. Last night, after I had an opportunity to meet and speak with many of you amazing folks at the reception, still pondering over that question, Lauren, don't think I forgot. I left there with my guest, and we went and we were talking and unpacking the reception and what I talked about at the reception. And then she got a call from her mom, and her mom was crying. And she said, we need to go. We need to go to wherever my mom is right now. And so we ended up leaving South Hill and coming back downtown, not many blocks from where the reception was yesterday, only to find her uncle laid out dead in his apartment in the hallway. Literally, no exaggeration. This is not an allegory. This is a fact. And so that's heavy on my heart and heavy on my spirit in this moment. And as a result, she was unable to be here with me in the physical sense. But not only her, every other person whose intersection crosses with mine, I still represent every waking moment of my life. As long as I'm conscious and there's breath in my body, that's what I stand for. Those are the people who I stand with. Those are the people who I stand for. So with that being said, again, I am Jermaine Mandrell Williams, director of Freedom Project East, a nonprofit organization rooted in community out here in Spokane that is designed to create opportunities. We build relationships to create opportunities for people who are formerly incarcerated, directly impacted by the criminal justice system, be that jail, state, federal, or even juvenile facilities or schools as they're called, to have an opportunity, just an opportunity, a mere opportunity at a successful transition back into the community. That's it. That's really the heart of it. All people are asking for is a mere opportunity. And so that's part of what it is that we do in the nutshell. The way that looks is that we try to provide wraparound services for individuals. I'll tell you all something very interesting. And I'm a directly impacted individual. I got myself in some serious trouble when I was 17 years of age. hurt some people, and that cost me a hefty penalty. And even though I was a kid, I was a youth, obviously brain wasn't fully developed and all of that stuff, that will never negate the harm that I caused to people, that will never negate the harm that I caused to my family, that will never negate the harm that I caused to society as a whole. And it will never, ever negate the harm that I caused to myself in the process too, right? I was talking to Lauren last night, and I was telling her one of the things that I absolutely love about Brian Stevenson's philosophy, and many of us know who Brian Stevenson is, fellow attorney like many of you. And he's famous for the movie Just Mercy in the book, Just Mercy. So Brian Stevenson's philosophy is, in no way or in no wise are we asking people to forget about the victims. In no way or in no wise are we asking people to forget about or dismiss the victims. All we're simply asking is to include all of the victims. All we're asking is to include all of the victims, because what we know, right, empirical data or otherwise, what we know is that many people who have committed victimization have been victimized at one point or some point in time in their life. Now, fortunately, some people suffer victimization and then they're able to get the help that they need and the resources that they need and the love and the support and the tenderness that they need so that they can get healthy, so that they can become healthy adults, so they can evolve into lawyers, attorneys, prosecutors, defenses, right? Be on the Washington State Board of Governors and stuff like that, right? Because they got what they needed in order to be able to heal accordingly. Unfortunately, though, there are a plethora of people out there who never, ever receive the support that they need or the resources that they need in order to heal accordingly. And so what happens is that cycles of violence begin to be perpetuated. And then people find themselves in the only place that sometimes society feels safe with them at, confined. And sometimes jail isn't good enough. Sometimes jail isn't good enough. That's not my philosophy, but what I realized going through my trial process is that the judge in that moment had an opportunity, and I don't blame the judge at all. I don't blame the judge. I understand now better than I ever did in my life. As a 45, soon to be 46-year-old male, I better understand now what was going on in my life when I was 17 and 18, going through trial court proceedings now than I ever did then. The judge had an opportunity to release me to the custody of my attorney so that I can go through treatment, so that I can get my needs met, so that the trauma that was inflicted upon me, right, I could heal from, I can work through, and as a result, become a productive member of society. Not simply dismiss the things that I had done, not at all, still hold me very much accountable for those things, still hold me very much accountable. But the judge said something on that day that's resonated with me ever since, and that was, Mr. Williams, as much as I would like to release you to the custody of your attorney, I have a fear that were I to let you go, you would probably go out there and kill someone. That's what he told me. Maybe he was right. Maybe he wasn't. I'm not sure. I don't know. I will never know because I wasn't released. I went to prison and I was sentenced to 36 years. And I did 25 years in 3 months. 25 years in 3 months for things that I perpetuated when I was a youth. 17 years of age. Again, youth does not negate the things that I did or the harms that I caused to anybody at all. The reality is just that now I'm in a position, all praises due to the Most High, because I believe. There were times in my life where if I didn't believe in something or someone, I would have never made it. So all praises due to the Most High, that I'm in a position now where I have an opportunity to stand for, stand by, stand with those people whose lives are very similar to mine, people whose lives mirror mine. I went through treatment programs when I was on the inside. Some people know what T4C is, some people don't. I won't bore you with all of that stuff. Thinking for a Change is what it's called, but I sat in these rooms with other men who didn't look like me. They weren't from Milwaukee, Wisconsin like I was. They didn't come to Seattle, Washington when they were a kid, when they were a teenager. They didn't come for a funeral. They didn't come on vacation and leave on probation, right? They didn't do that. White individuals, males, middle-class individuals, some people who came from a more affluent background, if you will, people who had graduated high school. I didn't. I got myself kicked out of high school shortly before I got myself in trouble. People who had two-parent homes, amazingly. I was homeless. I was a homeless teenager when I got myself in trouble. And I'm sitting in these rooms, in these treatment programs with these individuals, with these gentlemen, and some people who, identify as non-binary or otherwise. But I'm sitting in these rooms and I'm listening to people talk about their lives. And it was gripping because I kept thinking it's only happening to me. And it's only happening to my family, and it's only happening in my neighborhood. And then I realized, damn, this is crazy. This is happening. These traumas, these atrocities are happening to people everywhere, across the board. These traumas, these atrocities are happening to people. So for us, as Freedom Project East, we unapologetically center the lived experience of those people who are directly impacted and who are Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. But we also make it a personal policy and a professional practice to not turn away those people who are our white counterparts. Sometimes it comes down to us being able to connect them with other relationships or other resources that might be available in the community so that they can get the help and the services and the support that they need. But the reality is that if we have the funding, if we have the gap funding, and that resource is not available to them somewhere else to another agency, I'm writing that check. I'm taking them where they need to go. I'm providing that wraparound service for them. Not so much as me, the organization, I'm just a vessel. I'm just a vessel, but I'm providing that wraparound service that it is that they need. So whether we're talking about transportation, if we're talking about mental health support, if we're talking about substance abuse treatment, if we're talking about food, if we're talking about clothing, if we're talking about jobs, right? Work, having a conversation with an employer. And sometimes it really comes down to just having a conversation with an employer because they have a concern about this individual who has blemishes on their records, stains on their records, or gaps in their work history. But because of my title, because of my positionality, because of the way I happen to navigate the community and carry myself, sometimes, believe it or not, it really is as simple as them calling me or me going face to face and having a meeting and sitting down with them and them asking me, what do you think about this individual? Like, I know what their record says and everything else, but what do you really think about them? And what's something that I should be aware of? What's something I should maybe watch out for? If it was you, would you hire them? Sometimes it's really that simple. And that's humbling for me because with everything I've gone through and everything I've been through in my life, there's no way that I should be able to vouch for anybody. No way. But I can. And I do. And I don't have nearly the privilege and the resources and the esteem and the rights that many of you do. Not nearly. Not nearly. And I'm not saying it as a slight. And I'm not saying that as a form of disrespect or anything to that or anything to that effect. What I'm simply saying is that when you all are considering what you're voting for and who you're voting for, when you're considering the power that you've been vested, when you're considering the privileges that you've been gifted with, when you're considering the positionality that you hold in such a way where when you open your mouth, people speak, and you don't need a microphone in front of you. You don't need to be invited to a meeting. You don't need to sit up here in a fancy suit and a nice tie that somebody who cares about you got you. You don't need to do that because your words have power, your words have weight, and your mere presence has weight. I would hope that you all are thinking about how our liberation is tied together, like I said yesterday. Because again, I stand on what I said yesterday. I mean it. I will not apologize for it. Were someone to come in here right now and cause trauma, every single person in this room would be impacted by that trauma. No matter your color, no matter your race, no matter your tax bracket, no matter what side of the aisle you choose to sit on. Doesn't matter, age or otherwise. We're a community. We're a humanship, as I like to call it. And our liberation is tied together, and we need each other in more ways than we realize. I need you all in more ways than you realize. And you all probably need me in more ways than you realize. even if we don't fully get it yet, and even if we haven't had that conversation yet, and even if we as human beings have been so far removed based on our privilege, our titles, our positionality, or our trauma, that we have not gotten over the mental hurdle or the mental block that keeps us from separating ourselves from each other. I'll get ready to wrap with this. Assata Shakur, whatever you may think about her, she said something. I read this back in 2011 and it moved me. It moved me. It moved me in my spirit and it moved me to action. I remember it was a Thursday night because I was getting ready to give a sermon on Friday. Quote, if there's anything that I know at all, it's that a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. It can be torn down. End quote. One more time. Quote, if there is anything that I know at all, it's that a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. It can be torn down. End quote. So when I think about the walls that I've built inside my mind and the walls that I've built inside my heart and the walls that many of us have built to protect ourselves from the people in the community who we're scared are going to come in and traumatize us or hurt us or harm us, or the walls that have been built in our community and these gated communities that we live in so that we can keep certain people out of the community so that they don't bring down the property value, or so that I can go along living my life and not having to worry about what they're doing over there or what they're doing down there, excuse me, as a trauma response, or more accurately put, a skill set. I just remind myself, walls can be torn down physically, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, or otherwise. And I would never be in this position that I'm in right now as the director of Freedom Project East had it not been for people making space for me. I would never be here speaking to you all right now had it not been for people making space for me. The Spokane County Bar Association allowing me to speak at that convening that they were talking about, where I ended up gaining the attention, not intentionally. I didn't even feel like I deserved to be in that space, but I sat on that panel. I spoke honestly. I said what I needed to say. I was probably more apologetic than anything, even though I fancy myself unapologetic, but I was probably more apologetic than anything. But I caught the attention of Deborah Stevens. I caught her attention. Shocked the hell out of me when I got an email after that saying, Jermaine, I thank you for, I still have the email. I save it as a souvenir. I thank you for your presence. I thank you for being a part of the panel. And you really humanized the panel. And that moved me. And that moved other people in such a way that Justice Mary Yu, I'm not a name dropper, but I'm doing it today. But Chief Supreme Court Justice Mary Yu, shout out Mary Yu, ended up inviting me to become a member of the Washington State Supreme Court Racial Justice Consortium, which just convened not that long ago. I would have never, ever been in these positions had people not made space for me, had people not believed that I was more than my convictions, that I was more than a formerly incarcerated individual, that I was more than a young, dumb hothead out there hurting people, harming people, perpetuating cycles of violence and things of that nature. And so very, very lastly, as I turn this back over to Francis, I want you all to imagine just for a quick second. I'm not gonna keep you much longer. I know y'all do oral arguments and stuff all the time. I know y'all tired of listening to us talk, but I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine if you had to walk around everywhere you went, somebody could pick up a telephone or a tablet and find out what the worst mistake or the most embarrassing moment of your life was. Like if the most embarrassing moment of your life preceded you every single place that you went, how would that feel? No matter what that was. I don't care what that was. It doesn't have to be criminal. The most embarrassing moment of your life was on full display and you had no say-so over that thing whatsoever. That's what many people live with who are formerly incarcerated, directly impacted. And that's why it's so important for myself and many other people who are in this work, who I stand with, who I stand by, who I stand for, who I stand in front of, and sometimes in some cases stand behind. That's why it's so important that we fight with everything that we have, figuratively speaking, of course, that we fight with every single thing that we have to create opportunities to center people's humanity so that people can remember when it's all said and done, you were born a person and you lived a person and you're going to die a person, not an object, not a thing, but a human being. I thank you all for your time and I thank you all for having me here.
We need to see the humanity in each other. And I thank you, Board of Governors. The reason, why are you here? You are here because you have a mandate to be the champions for justice. That's why you have to sit down and listen to this. Now, Jermaine gave you the picture of a wall, a barrier. That barrier is not only on race, it's also on sexual orientation. 7 years ago, a young man came here from Texas to Spokane. White kid, full of life, and I saw him and I met with him. He had his first charge, a trespass charge. He was sleeping under the bridge. And I asked him, I said, what's going on in your life? He said, I'm from Texas. He said, I'm gay, and my mom and dad said I cannot live with them anymore. They disown me. And I jump on train, from train to train until I get to Washington. I have nowhere to go. He was under the bridge. He got cited for trespass under the bridge. And we talked to him. He said, since I left home, I gave up on everything. I got depressed. I used drug. I cope in any way I could. He said, but I said, could you give me the phone number so I can call your mom and dad? He said, never. I don't ever want to see them. I don't want to talk to them. I said, okay. We started on a journey. We sent him to treatment. He went to treatment. He completed treatment. He came out. He relapsed. We sent him back to treatment. He came out, did a little bit good, and then he relapsed. On the third time, he sick. He found a spouse. They went together to the Disabled Olympics. And they came back so happy and excited. They want Judge Logan, my courtroom judge, to marry them. They got married, and I said, can I call your mom and dad now? He said, okay, if you want to. And I called mom and dad. And I told them about his journey. And the old man broke down and cried. He said, you gave me back my son. He apologized to him. He said, I'm sorry. He said, my faith did not allow me to embrace you. But I since encounter what it means to love. And I see what you have gone through. And the boy was sitting in my office and was crying. And the dad was crying. I said, this is what it's all about. When we keep building walls that determines who is human, who is excluded, that is not justice. You are champions for justice. Break down these walls. If you are champion for justice, break down the wall of discrimination. Break down the wall of disparate treatments of people. Why should, like James Comey said, I didn't know until I look at the data. African Americans are 2% of the population in Spokane. A snapshot of jail that we took shows that we are between 12 to 15 and 18% in jail every day. And some are held in jail because they could not afford $50 bail bond. And you think that is fair and that is just? So they ended up pleading guilty for every charge and they built up a record. Now, imagine the wall Now, Jermaine gave you the description of the wall and the barrier. That wall and barrier came into his life when he was 18 years old. Science shows us that 18-year-old brain is not formed yet. And you send an 18-year-old to go and do 35 years in prison. We need to begin to look at justice with a different lens. The data shows that we can do better. It is not about calling anybody names. It's about us working together. We cannot keep Black men disparately locked up in prison and walk away and think it's okay. We cannot keep LGBT folks in jail and think it's okay. They went through horrendous experience in prison. Carmen told you about giving birth to a child with chains locked to a bed. Is that the society you want to live in? Is that the community you want to live in? We are at the point of Q&A. I'm sorry it takes so long. So I will entertain questions. Okay, Brett, my good friend Brett, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you all for your presentation. I'm curious, Ms. Ball, after you did the statistical analysis and had the showing the disparate treatment that minorities were receiving on sentences, if that was presented to the court, and then if you had a follow-up stats that were obtained to see if there's any improvements regarding the treatment after that point in time.
So the group that compiled that data, the American Equity and Justice Group, just launched their dashboard a couple weeks ago. So what they did is they did a deep dive into looking into our county. A bulk of our Superior Court judges were in attendance at our 2021 CLE, and they saw the data. And I had heard that there were some texting others curious whether their personal data was on display. There hasn't been a follow-up yet with our judiciary about that data, but we have been working with the American Equity and Justice Group because Spokane is kind of the right size where they can really wrap their arms around the data and be able to present it in a way, hopefully, to effectuate change. So there's further work to be done on that.
And Brett, you have to also remember that some of them have already done serving the sentence. And so, it's not about rewind, like people like Jermaine is out advocating. It's just about not letting anybody else get into this dish. Not letting anybody else coming from behind also be part of this data. It's not about unwinding what has been done, although I wish when somebody finishes serving a sentence, it's done. Like Jermaine said, it's done. So that you don't have to go and apply for a job and they look at your criminal history and say, you are not done serving the sentence. You don't belong here. When you go look for an apartment, they say, oh, you have this on your history. So you're never, ever going to finish serving the sentence if we continue to look at those criminal history. People should be judged by where they are now, not by what they did as an 18-year-old. He asks us a question. Do I want people to know what I did 18-year-old? I spoke pots. No, sorry. I did a lot of horrible things as an 18-year-old kid. And I didn't get caught. If I had been caught, I might also have been in prison. So yes, that data is there. And a lot of people are looking at the data. It's being applied nationwide, and they are looking at it. And I hope I can give you a good answer, but maybe I will work with Diana for them to come and present to the Board of Governors. That might be a best option so that you can ask that question there. Okay.
Governor Stevens has a, yeah.
Yes. Alec.
Thank you very much. And it is not a question, it is a comment, but I wanted to make sure I made it with your panelists present. So first of all, I want to thank you, Francis, and all of the presenters for this CLE. But I especially want to call out, acknowledge, and let you know, Mr. Williams, that I am honored. I am honored. You honor us to be here to tell your truth. And I just want you to know I've gone to a number of CLEs and heard a number of speakers. You could be my son, and your words brought me to tears. I do hope, Francis and governors, that as we do the other work that the MBAs are talking about, that we actually have the harder conversations about race. Too often, when we're even presented with the data, as you mentioned, former chair, a lot of people are push up against the data because it doesn't fit the frame of their belief system. And so it's very hard for people to accept that data with a default that says race has nothing to do with X or Y or Z, where for so many of us, race has everything to do with X or Y or Z. So thank you all, and thank you especially, Mr. Williams, for honoring us with your presence.
Thank you. Okay, other question in the room and on Zoom? Okay, in the absence of any other question, let me say this in closing. The work on helping to provide equality and equity in our justice system is a work for all of us to do. I want to give a big shout out to King County Prosecutor. What's his name now? Yes, Sarabrook, Dan Sarabrook. He has been on the forefront on looking at this issue. He served with me and Carmen on the Statewide Reentry Council. And it cut across all counties. And if you think your county's data is going to be prettier than Spokane, just go and look at it. It's on their website. And hopefully they will come out here and present. And they can actually show you county by county what sentencing looks like for people of color in your area. And I just want to say a big thank you to you. I'm sorry I had to quickly dash to go and do a program at the Karl Marx Center, and that's why I'm late. I apologize to each and everyone. And I'm grateful to President Olufsen for helping us take on this challenge in addressing some of these issues with our judges, with our elected officials, and be the champion for justice that Washington Bay State Bar Association is asked to be. Until that integrated bar is taken apart, until that champion of justice is removed from our charter, I think we will still have to continue to force you all to be in this room and to continue to be a champion for justice. Thank you so much for listening to us and paying attention and really participating in this. We are grateful, and I thank you, panelists. Carmen, thank you so much. And thank you, Diana, and the Washington State Bar Association Equity Team. You guys rocks. You know how much I appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you.
We are, I think we're a little ahead of schedule, right? We don't have anything else on the agenda until this afternoon. So with that, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation and all the panelists, especially thanks to our Governor Adwale for getting this all coordinated on our agenda. And see you all back here at 1 o'clock.